Hey everybody, David McCree, CPA here. I'm getting a lot of people asking me, that they send me emails and they say, hey, our little organization went over $50,000 for the first time this year, so we need help filing our 990EZ. We've never done that before. And so a lot of times, well, probably more than half the time, when I explain to them what the $50,000 threshold really is and how you calculate it, they realize they actually can continue filing their 990N, their electronic postcard. So I just want to go over today what the IRS means when they say $50,000 or less in gross receipts and you're eligible to file the electronic postcard. That's really not a correct statement to say, well, if your gross receipts go over 50,000, you've got to file the 990EZ. What the IRS says is, and you can see it right here on the page, if gross receipts are normally $50,000 or less. So what does that mean, normally? What that means is it's a 3-year average. Okay, you add up gross receipts for each year, for the year you're filing, and the previous 2 years. You get the total for the 3 years. You divide by 3. If that's 50,000 or less, then you're eligible to file the electronic postcard 990N. The IRS has special rules for calculating that average if your organization has been in existence for fewer than 3 years. And you can see that on the screen now. It tells you how to calculate it. So I'm gonna explain to you in detail the calculation if you're interested. And so here it is right on the IRS website. An organization's gross receipts are considered to be $50,000 or less if the organization has been in existence for 1 year or less and has received or donors have pledged to give $75,000 or less during its first tax year. Okay, so this is important. So let's say it's your first year. Let's assume that you're keeping your books on the calendar year, January 1st through December 31st. Okay, and it says, have you been in existence for 1 year or less? All right, so that means if you formed your organization on, December 31st, that's when you were incorporated. Okay, that's your first year, December 31st. It's 1 day, and the IRS considers that, 1 year or less. Okay, so they're going to expect some kind of a filing, even though you've only been in existence for 1 day during your first year. You still have a filing due on May 15th. Okay, it's going to be in the 990 the electronic postcard, unless you received a big donation or a pledge on that date. Okay, so this is important to understand that pledges are included here. So even if you haven't received any money on December 31st, if somebody says, I'm going to give you, $76,000 on tomorrow, that's a pledge, and so it goes over the $75,000 limit, so you'd have to file a 990EZ actually for the first year. That's a very rare, this is just theoretical, okay? Just so you understand the concept. Most organizations have little or nothing the first year, and they're eligible to file, but the 990N. But as you can see, you can have up to $75,000 your first year in donations or pledges, and you can still file the 990N electronic postcard. So what if you've been in existence for more than 1 year? Okay, so if you've been in existence between 1 and 3 years and you've averaged $60,000 or less in gross receipts during each of the first 2 tax years, that's actually awkwardly worded there. What it means is add all of your gross receipts for the first year plus all of your gross receipts for the second year and divide the total by 2. And that gives you your average gross receipts for those 2 years. Okay, and if it's 60,000 or less, then you can file the 990N electronic postcard. And as you can see, that's more than 50,000. Okay, but remember, this just applies to the first 3 years. So finally, if the organization is at least 3 years old and has averaged 50,000 or less in gross receipts for the immediately preceding 3 tax years, Okay, so that includes the year you're filing plus the prior 2 years. Okay, so this is the IRS's guidance. So now let's have a look at some examples. And first, let's talk about what gross receipts are. Okay, so this is not evident to everyone. Gross receipts basically means all deposits to your business bank accounts plus the fair market value of items that are donated. Okay, and you do not count transfers. So if you move money from your savings account into your checking account, you don't count that as income in your checking account. Okay, it's just you're just moving money from your left pocket to your right pocket. It's not an increase in income. But all your deposits are going to be income items except transfers, and those are easily pulled off your bank statements. If you had any items donated like clothes or food or a car or office equipment or something like that, the fair market value of those items it doesn't appear on your bank statement, but it needs to be added in as gross receipts. Okay, if somebody donates, baked goods to sell, that the fair market value of those donuts, that's gross receipts. Okay, so here's some examples of gross receipts. Corporate sponsorships or corporate donations, grants from private foundations, government grants, donations of any kind from corporations and individuals or any other type of business entity, a partnership, donations from donor-advised funds, sales of items that were purchased for resale, registration fees that you may have charged for conducting workshops or classes or some program function or event, entrance fees charged, like for a special event or a fundraiser or a program event, membership fees charged, sales of proceeds of donated stock, right? Somebody donates stock to you, and then you sell it. You've got two donations there for purposes of gross receipts. They're actually double counted. So if somebody donates $10,000 worth of Microsoft stock to you, and then the next day you sell it for $10,000, okay, you've got gross receipts of the donation of the stock, that's $10,000, and then you've got proceeds from the sale the next day of $10,000. So that one donation generates $20,000 in gross receipts. I know that seems unfair, it's double counting, but that's the way it is for purposes of gross receipts calculation. Sales proceeds of donated merchandise, same thing. The day they donate it, fair market value of the item donated, that's gross receipts, and then if you sell it, sales proceeds are gross receipts. Fees charged for services, rents charged, if you're renting out your building, rents are gross receipts. And then we've already talked about this, the fair market value of donated items and the fair market value of donated stock. However, it's important to understand that donated services, okay, the value of donated services or the free use of equipment or space, like if you're getting free rent, okay, or the free use of a truck, that value, that is not considered gross receipts for purposes of the 990, okay? So now that you know what gross receipts are, let's look at an example. Now this covers the gross receipts test for the 990 electronic postcard eligibility for organizations up to 3 years old. All right, so what I've done is I've made this little table here. And just for reference, what you saw earlier on the IRS website, the guidance for an organization fewer than 3 years old or up to 3 years old, I've just reproduced it here just for your reference, okay, and also here. So this organization started in 2020 and it's currently 2023 and we're trying to decide what we need to file. Now we can look back here and we can see that for the first year there were 0 gross receipts. Okay, so the average is 0. And of course, under the guidelines, they're eligible to file the 990N for 2020, their first year. Now in 2021, let's say they had $30,000 in gross receipts. Okay. Well, the average over the 2 years, okay, is 15,000, right? So the 30 plus 0 divided by 2, that's 15,000. Now under the guidance, as long as it's 60,000 or less, you can file the 990N. So again, second year eligible for the 990N. In 2022, they had $120,000 in gross receipts. The average there is exactly 50,000. Okay, 120 plus 30 is 150,000, plus 0, still 150, divided by 3, it gives you 50,000. So even though they had 50,000, they're still eligible for the 990N. Okay. Now let's look at another example. Let's say that the organization received 55,000 in its first year, 60,000 in its second year, and 34,000 in its third year. All right. So as you can see, the average in the first year is 55,000, and that's less than the 75, so it can do the 990N. The second year, it received 60,000 in gross receipts. The average is 57,500, so that's still 60,000 or less, still 990N eligible. In 2022, the third year, they received 34,000 in gross receipts. Their average here is 49,667, so that's still just under the $50,000. Okay, and this is even though they went over the 50,000 here in year 2, which brought the average up, they're still eligible for the 990N. What about if in 2022 they received $36,000 in gross receipts? That pushes their average up above 50,000, and so now they have to file the 990EZ. Okay, so you get the idea. You see how it plays out here. Now this again was for a new organization, all right, and essentially what you're looking at here, for those curious, I've just got a formula. Well, I've got a formula here to calculate the average of the gross receipts, and then I've got another calculation here that determines whether it's a 990N or a 990EZ based on a formula, which you can see up here. Now let's look at another example. This is for an older organization, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but you can see the organization has been in existence since 2016, and so now it's 2023, and we're trying to decide what to file for 2022. Okay, and we can plug in various numbers here, but again, you're out of your first 3 years, so you're just going to look at the current year, which is 40,000 in gross receipts, plus the 2 prior years. Okay, so these are the 3 years we'll add together and divide by 3, and here it comes up to 46,667, and they can file a 990N for 2022. Now notice here that for 2021, they had to file a 990EZ, and also for 2020 they had to file a 990EZ. So you can actually go back and forth depending on what the average is. You might be filing 990Ns for a while, and then your gross receipts average, the 3-year average drops below the 50,000, drops to 50,000. You can go back to filing the 990N if you so desire. Okay, until your average comes back up above 50,000, and that's what's happened in this example. Okay, if we had a little more gross receipts here, let's say we had 45,000, that still doesn't push us over. 55,000, that finally pushes us into a 990EZ for 2022. Okay, back at 50,000. We can still file a 990N. So you can see how important it is to track your gross receipts and be aware of how this works. A lot of people, would just say, like for 2019 here, for instance, they might say, oh, our gross receipts went over 50,000, so we need to file a 990 EZ. But no, because you're taking all 3 years into account, this average is only 31,000. So this organization could still file the 990N for the 2019 year. See, that's where a lot of people get caught. So I think I've more than covered that. Now, what about if you're close to the deadline and you need to file an extension? Well, for the 990N, there is no extension. Okay, you're supposed to file it by the due date, but if you don't, it's just not a big deal because there's no monetary penalty. You can actually file at any time after the due date without a penalty, unless you've missed 3 years in a row. If you miss filing anything for 3 years in a row, you automatically lose your tax-exempt status. As for the 990EZ, if you can't file it by the due date, then you're going to need to request an extension, a 6 months extension of time to file. Be aware that all of these returns now have to be filed electronically. Okay, the IRS is not going to accept a 2022 or 2021 return filed on paper. They have to be filed electronically or they will send it back. Filing an extension, the easiest way to file an extension, now you can still file an extension on paper with Form 8868, but I do not recommend it at all because the IRS is so slow in processing things right now. So slow. Okay, and a lot of times they don't process it at all and you could end up with a penalty. So the best thing is to file one online. I suggest you look at this organization. I'm not promoting them. They used to be called Express Tax Exempt. They've changed their branding to Tax 990. They seem to be the market leader right now in online filings. And you can go to their website, tax990.com. And they give you a lot of information here. You can scroll down and here, Form 8868, that's your extension. You just click on e-file now. And then you'll have to register and they'll walk you through it. And it's pretty inexpensive. You can see their pricing here. For the 8868, it's about 15 bucks. Okay, so that's a whole lot cheaper than I could prepare it for you. So that should do it. Good luck.